I guess very briefly, if you can, run me through some of the specifics on this case and what you guys are going to be looking at this coming week.
Well, I think one of the things that we really, want to focus on in this case is, and this is true really in any justification case, any self-defense case, where you really have to emphasize putting the jurors in the shoes of your client and doing everything you can to factually to bring to the table, so to speak, everything that Keith Sullivan was experiencing, everything that he knew about Greg Bagwell, his criminal history, his criminal record, his dangerousness, his threatening behavior, including right up into the hours, really minutes before this incident. And let the jury hear all that, hopefully let them visualize it, let them feel it, because this case really can't be understood outside the context in which the events occurred in.
Absolutely, yes, sir. And if you don't mind, I guess briefly tell me about um, what Mr. Sullivan went through that night. I mean, from what you guys have been working with him on this about, like what exactly went down that night that you're able to share.
Well, we could talk about the night of, and that certainly informs what was going on in the hours or even minutes leading up to this incident. But we can't talk about that really without dealing with, who Greg Bagwell was and what, was known about him throughout the area, but certainly to my client, because that really informed the way my client perceived the situation, the way anyone would perceive the situation when someone like Greg Bagwell appears, on your porch at 2 a.m. without explanation. But if we want to look at really what was going on just that night specifically, first of all, the sheriffs had been called out to Bagwell's home, to his trailer, twice that evening. The second time, roughly about a half an hour before all this occurred, and that call was made by Keith Sullivan himself, because he could hear with his own ears, and it's also captured on Keith Sullivan's home surveillance system. You could hear Greg Bagwell screaming, making unhinged rants, unhinged threats. You could hear him, it sounds like, with either a metal pipe or a metal baseball bat, destroying the trailer that he was being allowed to live in. He didn't own it. Yelling about how he's not going back to jail, yelling about bullets. And then we get to the second law enforcement response when the police actually go out and engage with Bagwell after Keith Sullivan had called for the second time. I remember it was another neighbor who called earlier, and there was talk of hearing gunfire coming from Bagwell's home. The sheriffs engage with Bagwell. Bagwell makes accusatory statements asking if it was the married couple across the street that had called on him, and suggesting, making unhinged remarks that aren't appropriate to be repeated on television about supposedly what my client and his wife were doing to him earlier that day. So it was very clear that Bagwell, had reason to take vengeance against Keith Sullivan and his family, because he believed that they had called the police on him. But compounding the problem is that when the police left Bagwell's property, they go and they stop in front of Keith Sullivan's house. And then ultimately they engage with Keith Sullivan. So if Bagwell had any doubt as to whether or not Keith Sullivan was the one who had called the police on him, all doubt was erased once he was able to see from his trailer my client interacting with the sheriffs. And then, of course, what happens almost immediately after the sheriffs leave, is we have Greg Bagwell on my client's porch, and he's there. I think the evidence is overwhelming, will be overwhelming on trial, that he's there to perpetrate harm upon Keith Sullivan and his family.
Absolutely, yes, sir. If you can, I'm not sure if you're allowed, but if you're able, maybe briefly explain what evidence you guys have that this was a self-defense case, that this was not a murder, like it's being, the trial is a murder trial, but that this was self-defense, I guess.
Well, there's a lot of evidence, but I will point out to the viewers that remember now that in any criminal case, the burden is on the prosecution to prove guilt, right? And in a self-defense, in a stand your ground case or justification defense, self-defense. The burden is on the prosecution to prove that our client wasn't justified, right? Um, you know, the evidence, I think, in favor of Keith Sullivan is going to come not merely from the defense case. There will be a defense case, and I think the evidence will be, I know the evidence will be compelling, but so much of the evidence that will favor Keith Sullivan and establish his lack of guilt, we anticipate is going to come out in the prosecution case. And, what does it look like? Well, it's going to look like a variety of things. And a lot of it's going to have to do with who Greg Bagwell was, not because you want to speak ill of the dead or dirty anyone up. But the reality is that my client knew just how dangerous Greg Bagwell was based on the experiences that night, based on the prior history. And that informed his fears and why you'd be so concerned when someone like Greg Bagwell appears on your porch at 2 a.m. with no explanation for why he's there. I think a lot of the evidence that the jury is going to get to see will come from the surveillance cameras that my client had on his home, in part because they lived in fear of Bagwell. He was such a unsettling neighbor, if you will. There's reasons why my client felt that he needed to have a home security system. So you're going to get to see this unfold. You're going to get to see Bagwell lurking around his porch, making furtive movements, clearly up to no good. You'll see when my client, Keith Sullivan, confronts Greg Bagwell and asks, "What are you doing here?" And Bagwell gives an answer that is indicative of someone there that is not there for any legitimate purpose. He says, "Oh, I thought you invited me up here." "Really? At 2 a.m? I thought you said I could take one of your cars." My client had no relationship with Bagwell. Would he ever be inviting him to his home or allowing him to take one of his vehicles? So those statements of Bagwell in and of themselves are indicative of someone who is there for an unlawful purpose and to do harm. Look at to see Bagwell's movements, both before my client opened the door to confront him, which were suggestive of someone who was in an unhinged, violent mood, and I get to see Bagwell's movements once my client confronts him, and those are very consistent with someone, or at least the appearance of someone who is reaching for a weapon. So there's going to be an overwhelming amount of evidence in this case. I said before, I think a lot of it is going to come out, or most of it will come out on the prosecution case.
Yes, sir. Of course. As for, I guess, the response in the community in DeKalb County, I guess, what have you seen? What has come out, I guess, either in support or against Mr. Sullivan in this case?
Well, I think some of the other attorneys on the case may be able to speak better to the community response because they're local, right? But I can tell you what I've observed from my vantage point. Certainly, I've gotten very close to the case in the last several weeks, and by all indications, the support has been overwhelming. As many people may know, there's an online fundraiser to help support Keith Sullivan's defense, the Keith Sullivan Legal Defense Fund on Give, Send, Go. There's been an outpouring. Certainly, we hope he continues to get this sort of support because it's certainly very, very expensive for someone like Keith Sullivan, for anyone to defend themselves against state charges like these, especially ones that are this serious. But even what we've seen to date has been overwhelming. People not only giving their financial support, which of course is very much appreciated, but verbalizing their support in the terms of encouragement, prayers, and so forth. So, by all indications, at least from everything that this New York attorney has seen, the support seems very much overwhelming. And of course, it's understandable because I think everyone relates to how essential it is for someone to protect their family, protect their home from a threat. At the time that the unhinged Greg Bagwell appeared without explanation on my client's porch at 2 a.m, his daughter, then 16 years old, and his wife were inside the home. Let's not forget that Bagwell was a known arsonist. I think I had one person suggest to me, well, I think it was on another news program, well, why couldn't he have just stayed inside and wait for the sheriffs to come? Well, in the part of the county that Keith Sullivan lives, it can take up to a half an hour, 40 minutes for a law enforcement response. He knew that from the prior time he called, just earlier, not too long ago, earlier that evening. And you have someone on your porch who is who'd burnt down their own home a year before. So what was he capable of doing to Keith Sullivan's home as Keith was inside, and his wife and young teenage daughter were inside as well.
Absolutely, yes, sir. And as it pertains to your firm taking on the case, what precipitated that? I mean, you guys are all the way up in New York. What spurred you guys to take this case on?
I mean, I'll tell you. I think some people may be aware. Myself and Stephen Razor, my law partner, defended Daniel Penny, the New York City subway case, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. And it was during that case, I think fairly early on, that I think Keith Sullivan and his family had reached out and expressed their support for Danny Penny and what he was going through, because Keith and his family also can empathize with someone who is being wrongfully prosecuted for defending himself and others. So there's that synergy, there's that similarity between these two cases. And then once the Daniel Penny verdict came out and he was exonerated, as we believe Keith Sullivan will be exonerated, we had sort of rekindled the conversation, and it went from there. But I will say, I mean, we're I was very proud to be representing Daniel Penny, hero that he is, and I'm very proud to represent Keith Sullivan. A pillar of the community, a dedicated family man, church going man. These are the type of people that, as a criminal defense attorney, it's an honor to be able to stand up and defend. You're not always in a situation when you're doing defense work where your client is necessarily such a fine person, but you do your job anyway, right? Because you have to defend the Constitution, and everybody's presumed innocent. But in the case of Daniel Penny and the case of Keith Sullivan, not only to believe they're morally, not only do I know they're legally innocent, but they're morally innocent as well. They're decent people who did the right thing, the necessary thing, under very very unfortunate circumstances. Tragic, the loss of life is tragic. There should be no question about that. But the law recognizes that we all have an inherent right to defend ourselves and our family from imminent harm. I think the facts in this case are overwhelming, that Greg Bagwell presented as a risk of imminent harm to Keith and his family, and Keith did what he had to do to protect himself, and more importantly, protect his, or just as importantly, maybe I should say, is protect his family and his home.